Welcome back to the podcast, man. Thanks for being on here. Congratulations on the moose and the house and the guiding season. We got a lot to cover here.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me back on, and congrats to you and Abby on having that kiddo there.
Man, it was crazy. She just like the every yeah, it unbelievable. The pregnancy thing and then her in delivery, you just standing there, you just feel worthless. Like I'm not doing anything. There's nothing. I'm supposed to be supportive, and you are supportive, but it doesn't feel like it's action. It's just words. But yeah, it's pretty crazy, pretty amazing. But thanks,
Yeah,
appreciate that.
absolutely.
So the house, you got some construction going on in the house. How long have you been in the house? And then what were some, and there's always people who ask me questions about what it's like to buy a house and own a house in Alaska. So what was your, that whole process like?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been going back and forth a lot from where I guide and then living in Anchorage. It's like an hour and a half each direction. So earlier this summer, I bought a trailer. My wife and I renovated that, and then I've been staying in that. And we're getting later in the season, starting to get rainy. It's like, well, staying in a trailer is not the most fun thing to do. And we were already talking about, we've been renting for 3 or 4 years. We want to purchase our own house, and we really like this area here where we're at in Willow. And so, it happened really fast. We had some friends purchase a house in early July, and we helped them move. And we're like, well, if our friends can do it, I think we could probably do it too. And so we started looking at places. We wanted something not huge because it's just my wife and I and our two cats. We didn't want something massive, but we didn't want something like super small. And we had looked at a couple places and we just couldn't really find something that we really liked. And then where we are now, I actually found just scrolling through Zillow, and I'm like, wow, this is like it's a good location. It's like the right size house. And so we went and looked at it, and immediately we're like, yeah, let's put an offer down on this place. And that was probably middle of July, and we had to go through several inspections. I know you and I had some stuff scheduled, and we had to keep doing I think we had the first major inspection and then two re-inspections because it was a fairly a new house. Nobody had ever lived in this
Mm,
place.
perfect.
Um, yeah, it was nice in that regard, but the person had done a lot of kind of funky things with the house, or a lot of things that had to be kind of fixed, which is a very Alaskan thing,
Yeah, for
especially
sure.
in a rural community. I asked my inspector, I'm like, what do you think? Like, there's a lot of things we got to fix with this house. Is this normal? Is this like average? He's like, honestly, this is probably like a little above average. So made me feel a little bit better, but seller had to do a few things. And then there were a couple of things that really needed to be done, but we're like, we want to get moved into this house. We were moving out. There were some new tenants moving into our old place, taking over our old lease. So I was like, well, we have to be out by this date. My wife started a new job up here in the valley, so it's like she has to be up here to get ready to start. We have to move in by this date. So we're like, all right, we're just going to sign off. We're going to take care of those things. And so from when we put an offer down on the house, like middle of July, we were moved into the house and signed papers, I believe, by like the third week of August. So it happened
Nice.
pretty.
It's weird finding houses up here. I know when we moved up, we lived in a trailer that was the teacher housing. We lived there, I think, for
Mhm,
3 or 4 years, and then there was a lady who owned a lodge, but it was mostly for like loggers.
mhm.
So there was a bunkhouse for it during the summer. They did a couple charters, but there was maybe 3 or 4 rooms. Really small thing because this may have been early 90s, may have been late 80s, early 90s. And in one weekend, uh, they were kind of walking around and they're like, "Hey, we are going to sell this place, and they are going to buy this place. So would you buy their place?" So it was just this switch. The family moved from their house to the lodge. The lady who was at the lodge moved somewhere else. And so it was a pretty wild, and in one weekend, like everybody just rotated and it was crazy. But the house we got into was built by someone in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was just a frame, and the logs from the house, uh, the beams in the house were logs that were logged from that from the property. and
Hmm.
it was just someone who was pretty decent with right angles, and it was just I know enough about construction to kind of do this, but you don't have the same, you know, checks and balances or regulations or whatever. Just someone who lives there in a town of 600 on an island in Southeast Alaska building a house. And so it was a nice house, but it was built on pilings. And so one of the first things we had to do was put in stem walls because it was sinking. It was right on the ocean. So I think there was a 6 inch differential between the back of the house and the front of the house, and it was warped and it was just a mess. And the electrical in there was kind of crazy.
That's
Um,
scary.
yeah, it is. It's I don't know the yeah, people who want to be able to do these things and can do enough, but there is a threshold to where you're doing things and it could be potentially dangerous or catastrophic.
Mhm.
And so I kind of err on the side. I think all of that growing up, seeing just that the house was jacked up and this was jacked up and this was potentially unsafe, that really reinforced me to kind of stay in my lane, which I do
Mhm.
sometimes maybe a little bit too much. Maybe I should be a little bit more, hey, go out there and test yourself a little bit. But man, I remember how stressed out dad was with, are we going to get a huge high tide and then, or is the foundation going to just fall in? Is our house going to sink in? Is there going to be electrical fires? Are going to be whatever? And so I was just, man, call the professionals, get that done. But that Alaskan feel is something that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, catastrophic failures, that's like the big thing. And I mean, that's why we have my dad here now. I'm assuming it was the seller that did the shower. And that was like, well, so kind of going back, my dad was supposed to come up and like work on some stuff with me. We're gonna do like gutters, maybe install a dryer vent, something just pretty simple. But like a week before he got here, the tiles on the floor of our shower started to kind of pop up. I was noticing grout on the floor. And so I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. And I was looking at the tiles, like pushing on, like, oh, there's water underneath the tiles. That's probably not good. So I started popping up tiles, and whoever had done it had just like glued the tiles down. They didn't like thin set. They
Mm.
had just like put little dabs of like silicone and put it down. So all these tiles were connected. So I lifted one and like nine of them lifted up. I'm like, that doesn't look good. And then there's just like, yeah, just like poured cement. Whoever had done it poured cement and it was all cracked. I'm like, oh, that's not good. So I started popping things up. This whole thing had been DIY. There was no backer board. It was just like tile on drywall, no waterproof layer. And once I got down to the cement and popped all the cement up, the subfloor was wet. And so luckily we had only been, living here for less than a month by the time we caught it, but it took like a week once I got everything out of there for everything to dry out. And had we not, caught that before we went several months, it would have seeped through the subfloor, destroyed that, and would have probably went down into the next room below. So luckily we caught that, but that was definitely something that could have caused a lot of issues.
Yeah, when we were looking first for a used place down here, that's the biggest thing. We get 140 to 60 inches of rain per year. Last year we had 175 inches of rain. But everywhere that you're looking, like my number one question was water damage. There just had to be. I assumed that anywhere that was uh, older than 20 or 30 years was going to have some sort of water damage, and whether or not it had been fixed was going to be the question. Like, wait, is it going to be water damage that's fixed, or is it rot? Are we talking mold? Um, the roof, how old is the roof? Because it's just so moist, and once that's compromised, you're in big time trouble.
Yeah, totally.
How much rain do you get in that? Because you're in the valley now. The valley definitely has kind of a rainy type season, but you
Mhm.
like 60, 70, 80. How much rain you get in there?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. I definitely know it's pretty wet compared to, where I grew up in Eastern Washington. Like my dad's up here and he was like, yesterday it was just kind of drizzling. He's like, is this a normal day? I'm like, yeah, it's pretty normal. This is actually pretty light for for Willow this time of year because usually, August, September, last couple of summers, it's been raining like 30 days in a row or something.
Hmm.
Like it just rains nonstop. And he's like, yeah, I couldn't do it. There's a reason I live in a high desert because I don't like the rain because it's gloomy. Like even today, it's super foggy and gray. It's cool. And that's just a
Hmm.
normal day. But yeah, it definitely gets a lot of rain for sure. Definitely not anywhere near what you guys get, but it definitely is wet.
Yeah, there's the perception of of the gloom and the rain, but it's like a lighter mist, which is super, super nice. If you're getting like an inch or half inch per day is just, man, that's brutal. But some of those days where it's just kind of a mist, so it counts as rain, you can still do a
Mhm.
lot of activities in. So you're not totally just wiped out because there's so much rain. And, people talk about Seattle and Portland being really, really rainy. Nothing even
Mhm.
close. And a lot of those days, and it's kind of gloomy and foggy and counts as some sort of precipitation, but really is not the incessant rain that really makes things miserable. So you can really make that work. A lot of snow though. You guys got probably 60 or so inches of snow per year. Looking forward to that, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, last year in Anchorage, I think we set a record at like 130 something inches. And then, we had our first major snow at the must have been like the second week in November and just dumped like heavy wet snow. So heavy when I was running the gas powered snowblower. Like I blew a belt just trying to
Mm.
push the snow. I was having to take like these little tiny chunks because if I took it too wide of a swath, it would like completely clog up and burn everything up. So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to what the winter's going to be here. I'm also just like a little on edge, like with the house and boilers and stuff. I'm like, what's it going to be? Because in Willow, they have several days in a row, well, they'll have -30, -40, -50 because we're at the base of Hatcher Pass and it just kind of, you got that cold air coming down the pass. You're pretty close to Susitna. So it'll be interesting to see what it's like.
Hmm. What type of heat? You said you had boiler for heat. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, we have a heating oil, we have the boiler, and then it's kind of circulates. We've got like a blower. It's kind of funky. We have a blower downstairs that pushes air out into the living space, but then we have baseboards in the downstairs bathroom in the crawl space and then upstairs. But the downstairs blower has to be blowing before the upstairs baseboard heat will circulate. So it's
Mm.
it's kind of funky. Like they have to kind of coordinate to make everything work. But
Interesting.
yeah, so we'll
We
see.
have a heat pump, which is awesome. So where it's electrical, our electrical bill is a little bit higher, but it's
Mm.
keep things nice and dry in here, and that's obviously a huge concern. But yeah, it's pretty nice once you get through that first winter and you kind of see how things all break in and how you're going to deal with the snow. And we have kind of a long driveway, but it's not too far. Like I can wake up in the morning, I can shovel that really quick, and I can then get to work. Access to the main road's nice, and then we're pretty close to the bus route, and so that thing gets
Mm.
plowed pretty early in the morning. So it's super nice to be out of town, have our own little spot, but be can get on the roads pretty easily. How is your access to the main roads?
Not terrible. We're maybe a third of a mile, maybe a half a mile from the paved roads. We've got a short way. It is kind of low for how kind of narrow and I just kind of drop down. So it'll be interesting to see if it gets icy, what that's going to be like. But then our neighborhood is gravel, and yeah, then we're pretty close to the pave. So I'm not sure how long it'll take. I've talked to some other people that live up here, and they're like, well, they eventually get to the neighborhood roads. So we'll see how long it takes them to get to that. But we're fairly close to a paved road, and that should be plowed pretty quick.
Yeah, that'll be nice. So, you got the winter off now. So, how are you going to? Maybe we can start with the recap. You worked your face off during the summer,
Mhm.
guiding, and now you're kind of in that chill sort of mode where you have plenty of time to shovel the driveway, so while wife can get to work. What was the season like?
And it was busy. It was super busy. Probably the busiest guide season I've ever had. I've still got a couple trips left here trickling in, but we're pretty much winding down. But we've been going pretty much full tilt since the beginning of June. I was working at Heather's Choice the last 3 winters. Um, I kind of going into June, I would be working Heather's Choice during the week, picking up any extra days I could. And then on the weekends or my days off from the kitchen, I was booking with trips. So I was working pretty much 7 days a week starting in June. Once I had enough trips on the calendar, I went full tilt into guiding. And, most Junes in the last couple of years, I'll get maybe 8 to 12 trips in June, which is pretty good. But this year, I think I had like 18 to 20 trips
Oh,
in
wow.
June. So it was super busy. and then July was busy, and then August, the longest set of days that I had slotted out were 25 guide trips in a row. And I worked like the first four of those, and then we had a bunch of rain and it blew the river out for like 4 days. And so I had 4 days off, which was nice because I actually got pretty sick. So it was nice to have 4 days to recoup. And then after that, I did 15 in a row. So that was the longest set I did in August. Going into September, super busy. And then pretty much going every day until last Friday was pretty much my last like consecutive set of days in a row.
Hmm.
But just super busy. We had a really good season. It was a really tough season. You know, obviously the king runs have been down, and it was super low this year. The pink run was like almost non-existent.
Which is
Normally,
wild because that usually is even though like in Washington they only have them every or like it's even years or odd years or whatever it is, so it's every 2 years you have a run, but they're typically just all over the place in Alaska. Like that's the fish that you can just depend on, and so to have low runs of pinks was pretty worrisome.
yeah. I mean, we were like, all right, looking at our watches because the trout fishing this year was tough as well. Like early season, it was good. And then it kind of tapered down, and we're like, all right, we're looking at our watches. Like, when are these pinks going to show up? When are these pinks going to show up? Like, the trout fishing was just getting worse and worse and worse. And the numbers weren't there. There was more pressure. And so the fish were hard, or they were getting beat up a little bit more. They were a little bit harder to target. And like we're in the middle of July, no pinks yet, kind of getting that third week of July, and all of a sudden, boom, they're in the creek, and then they're like taking off and they're going to spawn. It's like they knew they were late, and they're like, all right, we got to get in the river. Some of these pinks were spawning like less than a mile up from the mouth, and they're like, they get in the fresh water, they get in the tributary. All right, time to do our thing, dump our
Mhm.
eggs, and die. So, like by the time they got here, they were in the creek for 2 or 3 weeks, and I probably caught the least amount of pinks that I've ever caught before. A lot of clients, they come up. Some of them, want to target trout and grayling, but a lot of them just want to catch a fish on a fly rod in Alaska,
Right.
or some of them never caught a fish on a fly rod, and so just catching anything is cool. And so, we can do that really easily with the pinks because really well. They're People are stoked, but I bet you I caught less than 20 pinks all season. And
Oh
normally we
wow.
could do that in one hole in one day.
Yeah.
So the pink fishing was, but we did get a lot of chums. I have the most chums I've ever seen. My first season here 4 years ago, we had hardly any chums. I don't know if I even saw one, but this year we would go days where we catch like 10, 12 chums in a day, like big chums, taking you all the way to your backing, casting out, stripping back these big Dalai Lamas, and you can just see these big old nasty chums come out and eat these things. It was super fun. We had super good chum fishing this year, but yeah, no pinks. So, that then trickles down to the trout. I had really good days when the pinks were first starting to drop and those trout were sitting in those pinks, like sitting right behind them, eating the eggs as they're dropping. But, there's only a couple spots in the creeks where the pinks
Hmm.
were spawning. Normally they're like every single straightaway or every single shallow area, but there'd be like, all right, guys, we're gonna put in a boat and I'm gonna row halfway down the river to right where I know the pinks are gonna be, and that's where we're gonna spend all of our time in these like two or three spots. Whereas you should have that all the way down the river. And so once all those pinks died and they stopped dropping eggs, the trout were like, well, now where do we go? There's hardly any flesh. There's nothing else dumping eggs. And so they kind of just left. And so it's been really hard to find where those trout are and figuring out what food source they're in. Normally this time of year they should be big, fat, round, puking eggs, but some of these trout we're catching are super, super, super skinny. And like you can almost put your hand around them. They're so skinny. And so it's really concerning on what this trout population is going to look like in the next 2 or 3 years. We're catching a lot of, your kind of your 8 to 14 inch fish. So that next generation is going to be fairly decent shape. But our bigger fish, like 18 inches and more, they're really long and really skinny. So we'll see what happens. Another thing we've had, I've noticed, they have like these little, they look kind of like sea lice. They're not exactly sea lice, but they're like some kind of little parasite or something. And a lot of these fish that we're catching, the long skinny ones, they'll have like a big head, but super skinny, snaky bodies, and they're like really light colored, and they'll be covered in these little parasite things. And I'll notice sometimes if I open their mouth, they'll have them down in their gullet, they'll be in their gills. I'll lift a gill plate, and there will literally just be these parasites in their gills, and they go from that really like crimson red, really dark red gill color to like a really pale, like like when you get like a wet steak, just kind of just that kind of mushy,
Hmm.
nasty color, and their gills will get that nasty color, and they'll actually start like breaking down their gills, and those trout I think are just suffocating, and those parasites are just killing them. And Shane, the guy I work for at Bear Paw, he reached out to the biologist, and the biologist said, that's a normal thing. Those are normal parasites. They're native, but if a trout can kind of flush them out, then and not get them in their gills, it won't be fatal. But once it gets into their gills, into their system, it can kill them. And talking to other people across the state, that's a fairly normal fluctuation where you get your bigger fish will get them, they'll die off. The next generation will come up, get big, they won't have it. But I think part of what we're seeing this year is from the stress of less food, more pressure. These fish are getting caught a little bit more. They don't have as much to eat. So I think that's we're going to see a hit in our big fish for a year or two, but I think after that we should be good.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same parasite, but I do remember something pretty similar to what you're talking about, and I've seen them in a couple different places. And the first concern is, oh, this is some sort of disease. It's like chronic wasting, whatever, for trout. But a lot of times these can be, or at least sometimes that can be, it's not going to be some catastrophic new introduction. It's not some virus or some sort of parasite that came in from somewhere else that's going to take over. You see that a lot in fly fishing, whereas you get the snails, New Zealand snails, you get some that river snot from people who went somewhere else and it came back on their felt, and now all of a sudden you've got these rivers that are choked with invasive species. So some of these things that are native here, that kind of goes through the ebbs and flows, and maybe warm, low water, they get a little bit more pervasive, and then maybe the water temperature drops, and then the fish that had it are able to deal with it, cope, or they get old, age out, and die off with it. So yeah, sometimes
Yep.
it's hard not to be worried about these things because is this the next horrible thing that's going to wipe everything out, or is this something that's been around and they've been coping with it and it's going to be fine?
Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to see what happens. And it's a lot of people, they come to Alaska, and if they're a trout fisherman, they kind of have this idea in their mind, oh, we're gonna go to Alaska, we're gonna catch a lot of really big trout. And it's like, well, here's your really big trout, but he's like 20 inches long, and he's like as big around as like my forearm. Like
Yeah.
you almost feel kind of bad, or like when this generation dies out, and you got somebody coming up, and it's like, well, we can go catch a lot of fish, but they're all going to be like 10 to 18 inches. We just lost that upper age class. So you sometimes you almost feel kind of bad, but I think, as a guide, trying to set those expectations at the beginning of the day from, the rest of this season and going into next season are going to be really important.
Yeah. There was I don't know, this maybe 10 years ago or so now, there was a guy staying at a lodge who was on like a fly fishing team somewhere. So he was staying at a lodge on Prince of Wales in Klawock, and he was going out doing the charter fishing out in the ocean. But he also wanted to fly fish because he's in Alaska. And so the I know the owner of the lodge and said, hey, where would you recommend fish this time of year? I said, oh, check out this creek. Um, so he goes there and he catches fish because he's really good fly angler, and um, talked to the owner of the lodge the next day, and he said, yeah, the guy was really disappointed because he's in Alaska, so he's expecting 30-inch rainbows. Like that's kind of your
Mhm.
marker. You know, it's hard to get anything less than 18 inches because everything is so big, and the voracious eaters are the ones that are going to go to the fly first. So he was picking up 8 to 12-inch fish, and for this river, like that's kind of what you're doing. It's the closest river this time of year. That's kind of what was good. Um, and in Southeast Alaska, you get a lot of these rivers they don't drain as large an area, so you don't have the food source year round. You don't have as big a runs. A lot of times they're like going out to estuaries, and so you just don't have the food source and you don't have the genetics for these fish to be huge like you see them in Bristol Bay. So he thought Alaska just meant 30-inch rainbows or at least 20-inch rainbows. So to catch, foot long fish, 10-inch fish, he was super disappointed. But, that's kind of the reality in some places. And sometimes it's due to bad years and weather, whatnot. Sometimes it's just a matter of the location. You're not going to be
Yeah,
catching Bristol Bay type trout in areas that aren't Bristol Bay. That just doesn't happen.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And
So,
then
oh, go ahead.
I don't want to be all doom and gloom either. I mean,
Yeah.
we had a really good season and we had some good days and next year is going to be good. And although another major thing this summer is they shut down our silver fishing, like the silvers, the coho, they were just starting to come in, but they were not getting the returns they wanted, so they completely shut down all fishing. Normally we see a bunch of people at the mouths of all these tributaries of the Susitna, and they're catching silvers. We got people floating down the rivers catching silvers. We got people running jet boats up some of these tributaries, and they completely shut everything down. Not even you can't even catch one and release it. There's no silver fishing. And so we saw less people on the water, so there was less pressure on the fish this fall, and there was nobody catching and bonking silvers. So I personally feel like I saw more silvers in the creek this year than I've ever seen before. And I don't know if maybe, they put that regulation in place before the majority of the run got there, or maybe it was the fact that these silvers weren't getting whacked by everybody down at the mouth before they got up the creek. But there were some holes I would roll up to looking in these slack water pools, and there'd be 20, 30 silvers just stacked up, sitting there waiting to move on up. And I've never seen it like that. I've seen some schools of like maybe 10 or 12, but like literally schools of silvers stacked on top of each other. So,
Mhm.
we couldn't target them this year, but next year, or not next year, would be what probably was, I think silvers are 2 or 3, 4 years or something down the road, they'll come back. So hopefully we get a really good return of
Mhm.
silvers here in 3 or 4 years. That's also good for the trout this year because all those silvers will run upriver, drop their eggs. That's more food for the trout this year. They'll die. That's more food for the trout as well on their flesh. So, it was good in that regard. We'll hopefully get a good silver return. And then we actually had really good mousing this year. I've never had mousing as good as I've ever had this year. So that was really like there were days that's all we threw and we were
Nice.
catching trout and grayling. So it wasn't all doom and gloom, but definitely a little bit tougher year.
I think people need to know when they go anywhere, you're going to have good years and bad years. And so it's part of the expectation, or it should be part of the expectation, or at least an understanding of that dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever there's an intervention by the state, a lot of people complain because if it's just going to be a late run and they say, see, there was no reason for you to shut this down because it was just a late run. You should have kept it open. But if the run is late and it's small and you're allowed to catch as many fish as the regulations allowed before the closure, you could
Mhm.
really do some damage long term. So by shutting it down, the run is late, 3, 4 years down the road, like you're saying, you're going to have a really good, healthy stock. And so it's a little bit of a dip, but rather than just punish a run that might be a little bit late or a little bit um, thin, you allow that to replenish. And that's what you have to do. We don't live in the days where you can just catch as much as you want and everybody can do that. Like those days are gone. And we have to look a lot more long term rather than the right now.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So when I was up there 2 years ago, 3 years ago, however long that was, we were fishing at a six weight, 9.6, and mostly Dalai Lamas, white and black.
Mhm.
How does that change once you start getting salmon in the river? So if someone went up there June, same time I did, and was fishing some of those rivers off the highway, and like I said, six weight. Love the six weight. I love the 9.6 because those extra 6 inches just seem to help with roll cast, those chunkier flies, those heavy flies, because you don't present Dalai Lamas, you just get them out where you can get them. Um, so how would that change if someone was going to plan a trip with you guys later on in the year? Um, how would they adjust, or how would they switch up their gear? Or how would you recommend I switched up my gear if I was coming up?
Yeah, I mean, once the salmon are in and they start dropping eggs, those trout are like, all right, that is what I'm eating. Like I am gonna eat salmon eggs. And it's like they know as soon as this salmon come in, I feel like those trout get a little displaced, but as soon as they start seeing them kind of sitting near salmon, near their redds, those trout will sit literally right behind them or right next to a salmon. They will wait, and they'll actually sometimes ram into those salmon trying to get them to drop eggs. And so that 9 foot 6 weight, that's kind of a good, perfect rod for year round. I will, I tend to downsize my tippet. So when I'm running Dolly llamas and stuff earlier in the season, I'll run, maybe at the most 14 pound, maybe down to 12 pound to my streamers. But once I start dropping down, I'm fishing beads. I'm gonna probably drop down to like that 10 to 8 pound range. I won't go any lighter than 8, but I feel like that kind of it's not as intrusive with having that heavier line, and it's a little easier to work with when you're putting pegging beads onto the line, tying on smaller hooks, dropping down to like a size. I believe the smallest I'll go is a size 6 for those beads, but I'll keep my dolly llamas because there are always fish that will eat a llama, whether that's imitating uh, like your leeches and your lampreys, sometimes going to like an all white or like kind of a reddish or a pink Dalai Lama, and that'll imitate like some flesh as those salmon start to die. But definitely switching over to beads, having a selection of beads is important too, because as those salmon start coming in, as soon as they drop eggs, your their beads you're going to be fishing are that really kind of that vibrant, bright oranges, bright pinks, maybe a little bit like milky, so it looks like they've been dropped, maybe they've been fertilized a little bit, so something brighter. And then as you go further into the season, say like you'd go into the late July, early August, middle of August, you're going to start getting more pale beads as you go. So going from like a really vibrant, bright orange to maybe a little more pale orange, maybe going all the way then to like a white colored egg or really pale yellow, just as they're aging in the system. And if the water is getting off color, you get a big rain. It'll push some of those eggs out. You lose some of your clarity in the river. I want something maybe a little bit bigger than I have been fishing. So going from an 8 millimeter bead to a 10 millimeter, little bit brighter, like a bright yellow or a chartreuse, something that stands out a little bit. And then again, as it gets clear, then maybe downsize. If it gets really clear and really low, maybe going from an 8 millimeter bead down to like a 6 millimeter bead or a 7 millimeter. And then again, just playing around with colors. If you've got fresh eggs, or excuse me, salmon that are fresh to the river, dumping fresh eggs, that vibrant color as they start to finish their spawn, you're seeing less sitting on the reds. That's when I'm going to switch over to my more pale eggs. And even then, one day I might be fishing a faded pink and they're really liking it. The next day they're not liking it so much. Maybe I need to go to like kind of like a cloudy kind of white colored or a faded yellow color and they'll hit that. So it's just all about playing around, having I would feel comfortable having like a half a dozen different color beads. Um, Probably the most effective for me have been the South Central bead code beads. I'm not sure if you've seen any of Ken's like specific beads to this part of Alaska,
Hmm.
but he's based out of Wasilla, and he'll actually go out and find samples of eggs in the creek, put them in little like glass vials, and he'll take them home. He'll do research on them, and then he'll paint beads to match those to those specific areas.
Hmm.
And so those have been really crucial for me this season and finding what exactly this fish are wanting.
I'm just on Alaska Fly Fishing Goods. That's the fly shop in Juneau. I was looking through all of their beads and just tons of shades and colors. Who was that you just mentioned? What was that?
South Central Bead Co.
Oh, Bead Co. They have yeah, they do have a website. Good, excellent. Good. So that would
Yeah.
be, yeah, the people who like get in and get after it on that level and are meticulous. It makes such a huge difference. You see that a
Mhm.
lot, and like we're getting close to like rut season for deer, and there are people. A lot of people can make calls, but not a lot of people make good calls.
Mhm.
Drop shot calls. They're so good. Those guys use music would. And because they're used to, like, they have a musical ear, they can catch pitches and they want this to sound exactly correct rather than just mass produce uh, cheap cheap calls. So yeah, there's a
Mm.
huge difference in just a bead that looks like it's the right color versus one that actually is the right color.
Yeah.
As far as fly line goes, how does that vary? Are you using the same fly line year round? Are you just adding a tip to it? And then, if you go to Rio's website, they have just so many different types of um, fly line. But then you look at like an all around, like a Rio Gold, and people who don't like the Rio Gold are like, well, it doesn't really do anything. Anytime that you're an all around means that you don't excel at anything. And that's a good point. So what are you going for fly lines?
Yeah, so the fly line I had this year that we started out with for our 6 weights was a Rio indicator line, and the last section of it was kind of like a brightish orange color. It was a little bit heavier for turning over heavier indicator rigs, and that was good. But I noticed pretty quick that it wasn't floating very well, and uh, honestly, by the beginning of September, I started to see a failure where it was cracking and it was exposing the inner core. And in the past, I'd fished like the Rio Golds and the Rio Premiers or one of their higher end, and I
Yeah.
really liked those, and they floated really well. They were a little more weight forward. So I'm partial to those, but for my personal rod, my 7 weight that I was fishing from Alaska Rod Co., I was fishing the Orvis Power Pro Pro Taper Smooth for a 7 weight. So that was like a size or a size and a half bigger. And I wasn't really liking the feel with that rod. It just felt really heavy. So I actually purchased the Scientific Angler. I just looked it up. It's the Amplitude Smooth, their MPX, and it's only a half line size heavier. And casting that on the 7 weight is way more
Mm.
smooth. I'm really liking that line. I know Scientific Anglers has a really good reputation. So I'm gonna try to switch all of my rods over to that. Just instead of overlining the rod, I'd rather have it just slightly overlined or even just like the line that's designed for that. Because like you said, you go onto Rio or any of these websites and there's like 10 different types of floating line, and it's like, well, which one do I choose? And oh, this is a 7 weight line, but we line size it to an 8 weight. And it's like, well, then why didn't I just go buy a regular 8 weight line? Like,
Yeah.
why are we have all these different variations? So I just want something that's gonna be like a half a line size or the actual line size for the rod. And I'm always gonna have a floating line, and I don't want something that's gonna be really hard to cast because a lot of our clients are fairly new fly anglers. So I don't want something that you really have to load up a rod to get it going, or you really have to get that entire head out of the rod, whether that's 10 to 20 feet. A lot of our casts aren't even that far, so we're not even getting that whole head out of the rod. So, even just a double taper line would be perfect for what we're doing, especially because these creeks aren't very big, so we don't have to be bombing these casts way out there. Honestly, 5 or 10 feet off the front of the boat, or even if you're standing on the bank, some of these trout are sitting close. So you don't need a super weight forward line to get to where you want to go.
Yeah, I've used that indicator line, and I like it with my switch rod. Like you
Mhm.
said, with the regular 7 weight or even an 8 weight, it just doesn't load real nice. Once it's on the water, it's pretty nice. But
Mhm.
with the switch rod, when you get that other hand, and the rivers down here are, they're not huge, but those heavier flies to be able to, especially with no back casting room, you can just really throw out a nice roll cast. With the heaviness of that, the extra couple feet of rod really allows you to fish those sort of things well. So it's a pretty good application. The Southeast Alaska has a lot of people use the switch rods for those sort of purposes. And if you do want to bomb stuff, you can. Not so much for trout, but definitely for steelhead, that indicator line or that switch rod is definitely the way to go.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so what else we got? What else we need to cover on the fly fishing realm? Waders.
Yep.
Are you anticipating waders like going out every 2 or so years? I know whenever I bought a pair of Sims. I had a cheap pair of who knows what first, and then I got a nice pair of Sims. But the amount of miles that I was walking, and then in California, you have those vines that have the berry bushes, and so it's just poking holes in it. So I'd find that I would get about as much time in a pair of Reddington waders as I would a Sage pair of waders, and I'd be saving. I could get two pairs of Reddington for the price of the Sims because I was walking so much and I was hiking so much, and there was sharp rocks and all that stuff. So, wader wise, do you recommend going big or going decent? You know, if you do a lot of stuff from a drift boat, that's going to be, you definitely have wear and tear, but not the same as bushwhacking through. So, what would you recommend wader wise, maybe for you as a guide, and then maybe if someone's coming up to Alaska for the first time?
Yeah, so I've been personally running the Sims G4 zips the last 4 years, and I had a pair that lasted me from like early 2021 until about it must have been middle or the end of 2023. And I had a few holes. Some of the felt was starting to leak. The zipper was kind of leaking, and so I purchased a new pair in early 2023. And that pair only lasted me until about the middle of 2024. And I actually had like along the seam of the booty on the inside kind of ripped out. And so I was just getting wet. Every like my whole foot from my ankle down was soaked. And so I was, that was their top of the line model. I was only getting at best a year and a half before it started to have issues. Um, and
And that's a
I didn't
thousand,
really,
those are $1,000. Those are the
yeah,
award-winning Sims. That's the G4Z, or is it
yeah,
just G? Yeah.
yeah, with the zipper on it.
Hey.
Yeah. So, and granted, I'm wearing them every single day. It's always wet. They're not always getting super dry. I always flip my waders inside out every day. They're all I'm just completely inside out. That way they dry. So when I put them on the next morning, I'm not getting into damp, nasty waders from sweat from the day before. So I'm always flipping them inside out. The outside might not ever dry, but at least the inside's getting dry. But as much as I'm walking around, hopping out of the boat, dragging the boat up, um, doing it, living in them basically, they just weren't lasting me. So um, as it was getting into later this year, I was like, I can't be getting wet every day like I have been. So I purchased a pair of the Orvis Pro zip waders, and they're really nice. They're a little bit different. They don't have some of the features the Sims waders do. But I was a little skeptical at first too. They're a little bit stiffer. They're a little bit heavier duty. I think they have like 4 ply from like the knee down or something. They don't have that felt gravel guard like the Sims do. They have like a full, I want to say it's Cordura all the way down to like the little clip and the gator that clips into your boot. And so it just kind of looked a little different. Um, and then I also purchased their Pro boot that has like that the Michelin rubber on the bottoms. That's that really aggressive tread, and I've loved them ever since I bought them here. I've been running them for not quite a month, but man, they're so much more comfortable. They're warmer. When I would get in the water with those Sims G4s, you could just feel the cold coming from the water hitting your legs. But with these Orvis ones, because they're a little bit heavier duty, they're a little bit thicker, I don't feel that like that cold seeping through the wader onto my leg. One thing with the Sims is with those felt gators, I'd rip those things up in a couple of months and they were just, I would have no gator on the inside of my feet where they're rubbing against each other or hitting sticks or something. Whereas again, with these longer gators on these Orvis Pro waders, they're not rubbing on each other and they're not going to destroy and felt's not going to rip off and they're going to protect my boot a little bit better in the long run. And then with the boot too, my previous pair was a pair of I think they were a pair of Sims G4s and they lasted me a really long time from, the middle of 2021 until this year in 2024, but they were starting to fall apart to the point where they were getting big holes in them. And I'd be walking in the river and I'd trip because I would step into a
Mm.
stick and I would get stuck in the hole of my boot and then I would like trip and fall. So those need to be replaced. They were kind of getting a little flimsy. Last year, I wore them all summer, went on a moose hunt, and I walked around a bunch in those waders, and it actually gave me some IT band issues because I had no support with those flimsier boots. Whereas now with these Orvis boots, they're way stiffer. They have way more ankle support. They almost seem a little bit taller. And so they're really locking my feet in place and they're just have a way better grip. So overall, I've been pretty happy with the new waders, the new boots, and I'm gonna stick with these and kind of see, into next summer what they're gonna be like. But I like how much more this is protecting my legs, both from the brush, from the cold, and then protecting my ankles and my joints. And we'll see what happens. I do know that they're gonna be a little bit warmer next summer. That was a nice thing about the Sims is since they weren't as thick when it was really hot up here being like 70 plus
Yeah,
degrees.
yeah,
Um, we'll see what the Orvis ones are like because I have a buddy that has the same pair and he's like, man, these things can get really hot in the summertime. So
yeah.
we'll have to see.
It's kind of funny that it seems like you're going East Coast. When I think of a West Coast fly angler, I think of Sims, I think of Rio,
Mhm.
I think of what was the other?
Reddington.
Oh, there's something else. Anyway, so like the brands, when you think of like your stereotypical person, it's Sims, it's Rio, and then if you look more East Coast, that's kind of your Orvis, Scientific Angler. So it's pretty funny that you're kind of going East Coast. Um, and it's so interesting with waders, and same thing with hunting packs and everything. You can have two people that love their brand because it just happens to fit them a little differently and a little bit better. I had a pair of Sims waders that for whatever reason, there was just a little bit of extra fabric in the on the inseam, and it just kind of rubbed. And after walking and walking and walking, just that little bit of extra rubbing ended up putting a hole right there. And
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it is. Someone else could have had not had that problem because you know, they're a little bit wider or a little bit taller, a little bit short, whatever it is. It's just a matter of how it fits. So that's what's tough when you're looking at shopping or buying a pair. You're going to get people that say 5 stars, best wader ever for the Sims. Same thing about Orvis, same thing about Patagonia. And it's really, if you can't put them on, it's kind of tough to figure out. And then you can put them on, but you're not going to be able to like wear them,
Mhm.
for a week and just go through the brush and do all that stuff. And it's kind of hard to figure that out. But that sort of detail about the stoutness of that Orvis, so you can use in other applications. I know when I go duck hunting, we're sitting on
Mhm.
some of those rocks. It's nice to have a little bit of extra heat source, because that wind and you're
Yeah.
just sitting there, you're not moving whatsoever. You're not generating heat. You're sitting on cold rocks. Um, that could make a huge difference. Whereas the sim ones might be a lot more comfortable in June.
Mhm.
Maybe it's the Orvis one when you're moose hunting or duck hunting. So, yeah, there's really what an amazing time to be alive that there's really no bad option. Anything is better than, what they had 40, 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not wearing like super thick neoprene waders where I'm just sweating my butt off the whole time I'm walking around in the summer. So we do have options and having clients from all across the country and talking to other guides, everybody has a different set of waders. And so you're able to like, hey, I see you're wearing those Orvis waders or like the Grundens waders. There's a guide that I know up here who really likes his Grunden waders, and so asking him, hey, what do you like? What do you not like? And then like my outfitter Shane, like he has a pair of Squala waders, he has a pair of
Mhm.
Sims waders. So talking to him, seeing what he likes, and then even with our client waders, we have Reddington, Sims, Orvis, Hodgman. Like we're not like brand loyal for our waiters. So it's like we can see what has a longer what the longevity is on different brands and like, hey, this is what I like about, what I'm seeing in this Orvis waiter, or this is what I'm liking in the Sims, or like, maybe I'm not liking this about a certain pair. So being exposed to a bunch of different types is really, really good.
Um, does Gore own Sims, right?
I believe so,
And
yes.
does Gore also own Grundens?
I'm not sure.
So I know that you can either like buy the technology or buy use of the technology because when Grundens now they use Gore technology for their waiters, right?
I'm not sure. I'm not 100%. I think so.
Yeah, so I think it's you either are owned by it or you can use that technology. Um, yeah, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, you have these different brands that are getting into it, and it might be very, very similar. Um, what would you recommend for like the number one? If you're going to spend money, would you spend more money on an awesome fly rod that casts exactly as you want? Let's say you have $1,000 because everything's $1,000. You're going to
Yep.
buy $1,000 pair of waders. You're going to go $1,000 fly rod, or I guess like boots and a reel. So boots and reel like 500 bucks, 500 bucks ish, maybe roughly. So what would you spend split the $1,000 like your perm fund? Here we go. Your perm fund. Are you spending it on a pair of waders? Are you buying an awesome rod, or are you buying waders or boots and whatever else I said? I
Ah,
got the newborn baby brain. Like I'm not a newborn
yeah.
baby, but just like that lack of sleep.
No, no, for sure. The thing that's lowest on my list is going to be a reel because a lot of times I'm not really using a reel besides line storage. So that's like at the bottom of my list. I would probably say I'd be spending my money on waders and boots. And it all depends too, like if you're not fishing more than, you know, maybe a week tops a year, you're just going out a couple weekends, maybe a couple of times, maybe going like 1 week during the summer, you can get, you know, 20 years out of a pair of waders because you're not putting that wear and tear on. But if you're going to be out all the time, I would definitely be putting my money into the waders and boots and then maybe on my rod. But if I'm just kind of going out several times a year, maybe I'm going out even just once a weekend, you're going on a week long trip. And let's just say you're going out 20, 30, maybe 40 days a year throughout the whole season. I would honestly probably split that up and spend like, a few $100s here for a not maybe not the top of the line wader boot, but like this the next step down or something. And then the same thing with the waders. Maybe I want the G4s, but maybe I won't spend that extra couple hundred for the zipper. Maybe I'll to use the bathroom, I'll just pull my waders down instead of zipping down. And then the same thing. Maybe I'm not going to buy, the top of the line Orvis rod. Maybe I'm going to buy like the Recon or like I might, buy an Alaska Rodco rod, but maybe not their top of the line rod, maybe their next one down. Um, Same thing with the reel. Maybe I won't buy an Orvis, their Mirage is their top reel. Maybe I'll go down and buy like their Hydros reel. So not the best of the best, but still really high quality. That way I kind of split that money out and buy the not the best rod, but the cheapest wader, or not the best wader and the cheapest rod, but kind of just level everything out, I think is how I would ideally do it.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to spend $1,000 on a pair of waders and then have a rain jacket that's like frog togs because you're
Yeah,
just going to get
exactly.
absolutely demolished and all that water is going to go down and you're in trouble.
Yep, exactly.
What kind of wading jacket you have?
I have two. I have the Sitka Kodiak jacket. I don't think they make them anymore. They're like a long trench coat. So it's just a
Mm.
shell. It's got pit zips. It's got a hood. And I believe that's Gore-Tex. And it like when I put it on over my waders, and because it's so long, it goes almost all the way down to my knees. And so I am fully waterproof at that
Look like
point.
a
Like
swimmer.
exactly. I've actually last year, I jumped off of the raft, and when I jumped off of the raft, I pushed it away, and so it went out into this slough, and so I just instinctively reached for it, and I jumped off of the bank, and I grabbed the boat, and I was treading water, like I was floating, I wasn't touching bottom, and because I had that long trench coat on, I was in my waders, and that pressure of the water actually pushed that rain jacket against my legs, against my body. And I grabbed the boat and I backstroked to shore and I got out and I was not wet because I was
Wow.
so sealed up that it didn't get into my wader. So I got really lucky. Um, so I really like that for most of the summer when it's not super cold, but it rains a lot. And then like this time of year, I have the sick Hudson jacket. It's like their duck hunting jacket. It's a little bit thicker rain material. It's not as long. And then it's got a little bit of insulation on the inside. So I'll wear that over the top of my waders as well. And it's just got a few more pockets and things that are a little more comfortable. And it's just, yeah, just a little bit heavier duty. And that's honestly probably my go-to jacket for just about everything. Like from going when I was in Kodiak this year, when I was on my moose hunt, it's just a little bit heavier duty and just has a little bit more insulation. But I'm always taking my Kodiak jacket because if it's just a light drizzle or if it's warm and raining, that thing is nice. Just open the pit zips and you're gonna stay dry.
Yeah, it looks like I don't know if it is discontinued or not, but you can get that thing at almost half price now, so that's pretty nice. I collected some
Oh,
Sitka gear. As soon as you get a new pattern in, you buy the old pattern for a discounted rate. Like that is the way to
mhm.
go. I don't know if I ever buy stuff used necessarily because especially like rain gear, you're never sure. But
Yeah.
with that extra length on the jacket, would you? Yeah, it seems like it'd be a little bit more difficult to hike around and maneuver. Is that more of a jack that's best for like bank fishing once you get out of the drift boat? Or you said you used it on a moose hunt?
Yeah, yeah. No, I would totally wear it anywhere. The nice thing is that once it gets down kind of, where a regular rain jacket would end, kind of the bottom of the zipper, there it's actually kind of open from
Hmm.
there all the way down. So it's kind of a slit down the front. And so you can walk and it doesn't impede your movement. And I can actually sit on it pretty comfortably. If I'm wearing it over my waders and I'm rowing, I can sit on it. And it's honestly another protective layer on my butt. So my butt
Yeah.
doesn't get as cold and doesn't feel as damp at the end of the day. So I haven't noticed any issues with walking around or hiking around in it.
I guess my first hesitation would be I'm thinking about rut down here when you're climbing up and over and down and through alders and blowdown and whatnot, but that just sucks no matter what. And yeah,
Yeah. I guess I will say too, like if you're wearing that longer jacket and you are over your waders and you're wading, the bottom part of that jacket's going to get wet. Like
yeah,
it's going to be in the water. That's the only issue. But again, if you're wearing waders, that's not going to be. You're never going to feel it
yeah,
necessarily.
nice. What else you got fishing wise, man? We're coming up on an hour here and do some fatherly duties. But I
Yeah.
think what would you recommend for I guess maybe the Perm Fund is coming out. So if you happen to have money, if you want to spend your Perm Fund, what would be what is it, 1,700 bucks this year? 1,500 bucks?
Something like that.
So you'd
Um,
prioritize waders.
Yep, I prioritize like your waders, your boots, stuff that's going to make you comfortable, and then, don't spend it all of your money on one item if you can. Just try to like disperse it out, like by not the lowest and the highest, but maybe middle of the road, maybe a little bit higher than middle of the road for everything. So waders and boots are going to be up there, and then your rod, or maybe I go by waders and boots, line, because line's really important, and then rod, and then reel at the very bottom.
And what about brands? So maybe if this would be like
Brands,
my perfect if I was getting multiple Perm Funds or if I would like be a rotten father and spend my daughters, I would go. I love my Galvin T6 fly reel. A buddy of mine came up to Alaska. He actually supplied the aluminum for Galvin, and I love that reel. I've had it for 12 years now, and it's so nice. It's been chipped to where that copper, that bronze copper look is almost completely gone just because it's chipped, but it's so smooth, it's so great, so easy, so dependable. Um, I have a Sage One. That's a 9 foot, 6 inch, six weight. Love it. Like that thing is going to take most of the perm fun check as it is. But that I love that 6 weight setup is so nice. Uh, I got Reddington waders just because I know I'm going to kind of just go through them. Jacket, I go with the Grundens, that quarter zip. When it's really, really wet, it's like that rubberized. That way, there's no way that it can get in. It's going to insulate heat. You're going to sweat your face off if you're doing much hiking, but you are going to be dry from the rain for sure. Um,
yep,
Great steelhead jacket. Love that. Otherwise, I have a Stone Glacier rain jacket. I think it's the M5 or whatever one doesn't have the insulation in that. Fly line, I have the indicator. I do have the real gold, just because it is kind of an overall. Like I said, some people don't like it because it doesn't really specialize in anything. Um, and then yeah. So what are some of your brands?
Yeah. So for rod, the Alaska Rod Co. rods are hands down my favorite. I have the anadromous 9 foot 7 weight. That's kind of a good do-it-all rod for Alaska. And then I was actually able to do some R&D on one of his 9 foot 5 weights, and I believe that's his Alaska rod series. When he gave it to me, he had it built with a fighting butt because he originally wanted it for a 6 weight, but it actually weighed out to be more like a 5. And I told him, like, dude, I will totally fish a 9 foot 5 weight with a fighting butt. And I was able to play around with that a lot in the last month and a half. And I've loved that rod. It's light, it's a 9 footer, but it feels like a 9.5 or a 10 footer. Just the way it casts. It's light, it's carbon fiber. It's got a really good backbone. I was able to land some big trout back by myself, land them in the net while I had the rod in my hand. So really like that rod. That would probably be my go-to in the future, like my daily driver, a 9 foot 5. Um, for reels, I really like my Hydros, my Orvis Hydros. I think I have like their number 4 or something because they have different, different numbers for different sizes. And it's a really nice sealed drag system. So if you would take it to salt water, it wouldn't destroy it. And it's got a really nice drag. It's really smooth. It's a really good looking reel. So I would go that route. And then for line, I really like that Scientific Angler, their Amplitude MPX. Really enjoying that. For waders and wading boots, as of right now, I'm really liking the Orvis stuff. Their Pro zips I'm liking, and then their Pro boot. Again, the zipper is an extra a couple $100, 150, whatever. But if you're wearing them all the time, it's really nice to have that zipper. If you're taking layers on and off, or if you have to go to the bathroom, it's just having that zipper is super nice. And my dad, he has a pair of Orvis Pro waders, but they don't have the zipper, and he's what 61, and he's like, next pair of waders I'm getting a
Yeah.
pair of, because the older you get, the more you gotta pee, and yeah, so really liking those. And then when it comes to jacket, I'm really liking my Sitka jackets. Shane, the guy I work with, he really likes his QU jacket, and I have been seeing a lot of Sims jackets that fail. I do have a client that comes up, and last year he bought a new rain jacket because his Orvis jacket failed on him. He bought a brand new Sims jacket, brought it up this year, and then that Sims jacket failed on him. So now he went and bought a Kuiu jacket, and that's what he's going to start wearing.
Okay.
So I'm really liking that Kuiu and that Sitka. I haven't had a chance to try to Stone Glacier, but I've heard good things, so I might try something like that. And yeah, so I think
That's plenty of
that's
money. That is
yeah.
probably went over budget, but that's fine. I think I know a lot of people that are asking those sort of questions, so it provides some clarity. But
Yeah, and then what you wear under your waders is important too.
cotton, right? Just
Don't
cotton,
yeah, yeah, don't don't wear
cotton,
jeans. Don't wear, I see a lot of clients show up in jeans, and I think that makes it way worse.
brutal.
I wear like I get really nice waders and stuff, but honestly, the pants I wear underneath most of the summer, I go to Target or Walmart and I get the Wrangler, what are they, the GTX or something like that. They're like they're outdoorsy kind of nylon breathable pant. And those things are great
Hmm.
for wearing under the waders. And then this time of year, I might wear those and then a pair of puffy pants. Like I have a pair of First Light puffy pants, and I'll wear those under the waders. So much better insulation. And then, wearing a pair of like wool socks, like a pairs of darn cuffs, or the big, heavy, smart wool sock over the top, I think is really important. And then having, puffy layers, synthetic
Yeah,
puffies and stuff on your upper layer. So
awesome.
yeah.
Well, thanks, man. Really appreciate you being on here. Enjoy the new house and enjoy the free time, and have to get you back on and talk about some moose hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, Jeff.
Well, thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.